is there actually something definable that makes female strong character versus a male strong character? And this is one that is probably able to be argued about by lots of people. Hi, welcome back to Weatherford Daze. I am Rachel, and we have a very, very special guest tonight. This is Leia. She is Jason and my oldest daughter. She is 19.
And quite special.
Okay. All you guys are special. We are going to be talking about something that Leia wanted to talk about. She was very eager and decided that we'd give her a go at the camera. So, our topic tonight is strong female characters and what makes a strong female character. And I am really excited to get the younger generation's viewpoint here. And I know a lot of what she's going to say, I think, but she always manages to surprise me somewhat, brings in some new. I love talking to her. She has been, my first, she's been the one that I experimented on in talking to my children and teaching you guys how to analyze books and movies. And
Yeah, I'm kind of the trial run, but I turned out all right.
I think so. Let's get into it. Leia has the book tonight, or books.
I have a whole stack sitting under the table right here. I don't think I'll reference them all, but I just thought it's always good to be surrounded by books.
We can talk about them even if you don't pull them out.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
It would be quite the stack to pull out.
All right, so what's the first one you'd like to highlight?
I feel like this is a good example to start with, considering it's a very popular book series, and it kind of goes into different standpoints of femininity, I think. It doesn't need too much introduction. It's the Hunger Games series, so I have the first book and the prequel series, Songbirds and Snakes, which is a mouthful to say.
Which is one that I actually have not read. I've read the original series, but haven't read the prequel series. So,
it's so good.
Yeah, you'll have to fill me in on what makes it special.
Yeah, I'll go into a brief description for anyone who has somehow never managed to read the Hunger Games series. Some people haven't read the Songbirds and Snakes. I didn't until just recently, because with all the hype around the movie, I wanted to know what was going on with that. It takes place in a dystopian society where there is the capital and then the 12 districts. And Katniss, our protagonist, lives in the slums of the slums, District 12. And she is sort of a guardian over her sister and her mother. And after her sister, by a slim chance, gets drafted into the Hunger Games, a violent television show in which to remind the kids that and the parents that they're all powerless in this city, they must fight to the death for the capital's entertainment. So Katniss, to save her sister, volunteers and fights to survive in a situation that's not just about living, it's about being entertaining, which is a very depressing concept, but it's an excellent book. This one, not many people have read before now. With the movie coming out, I think a lot more people have looked towards Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and gone, actually, maybe I should read this, because it was about President Snow. Most people go, okay, why do we want to read about him? But specifically, I think Lucy Gray's story, I love Snow's story. His whole psychology is incredibly fascinating. But Lucy Gray specifically in this, she is a sort of wandering musician who has a family who, during the war against the capital and the districts, they ended up stuck in kind of the District 12 area, what is now District 12. And this is taking place when they're first starting the games. And the kids are involved in, the capital kids are involved in trying to make the Hunger Games something to remember. And Lucy Gray is someone who automatically has a very showy presence. She's quite alluring and interesting and walks to the beat of her own drum. And her story is told through the perspective of a young President Snow.
So, what is it about these females that you feel like makes them strong?
Most people, I think, when they look at movies and books and media and they try and picture a strong female character, usually they'll go, okay, so the female is the protagonist. The female character is physically strong or gifted or capable or not necessarily dainty and keeping to themselves. They're a little bit more outspoken. But while some of those traits are fun or nice to have in media, I feel like specifically what makes these characters strong is their love for their family, especially in Katniss's situation, but also just the bravery to be themselves. With Lucy Gray, she is quite opposite to Katniss. She has more of a rebellious streak. She's a natural on TV. She's a lover, she's not a fighter. Katniss was always more of a fighter rather than a lover, but she was very strong and resolute in, I guess, being herself, which sounds kind of cheesy, but
It's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because it's something that you hear a lot. Be true to yourself,
mhm,
right? Be who you were made to be who you are. All of those are things that you hear a lot, but they're kind of they're intangible. They're not
mhm,
really, it's not a concrete thought necessarily because who you are is something that, yeah, you need to figure out who you are, but it's also about figuring out who you want to be.
mhm,
And the process of figuring out, yeah, I really think it is more who do you want to be than it is who you are.
yeah, that's
Because we can be something and be disappointed in
yeah,
what we did and say, well, that's not who I am. And it's not who you are because it's not who you want to be.
mhm,
It's not, you want to be proud of yourself. You want to do things that you feel are justified, that you feel are
mhm,
honorable. I don't know that I've really thought about it quite like that before.
mm,
And the process of all of that is kind of discovering yourself, discovering who you are is and who you want to be, is figuring out what makes the best type of person.
mhm. That's an interesting, I guess, dichotomy between the songbirds and snakes is told from the point of view of, I'm not going to try and pronounce his first name, but young President Snow, and his perception of other people and of himself is very fractured. He views everything as almost like it's a game. He's a big player in creating the games, and the way he views Lucy Gray is almost as if she is both, I guess, someone that he desires romantically, but also desires as an asset. He views
Mhm.
her less as a person. And she was always very sure of herself. She always, instead of treating these games as like, we gotta kill to survive, she would bring music and love to people and really humanize them because she didn't view herself as someone trapped in these games. She was her own person, and she was going to take the opportunity to make something of herself even if she did die or
So it's not just who you want to be either, it's what you're good at, what you're gifted at, right?
mm,
And figuring out the best way to use your strengths and your giftings in the situation that you're in.
mhm,
But so when we think about what makes us uniquely strong and uniquely gifted, figuring out how to use our own spin in the situation to make things come out right. A lot of times in fiction, you'll see just some obvious strength. Somebody has been gifted with magic, so of course they
Mm-hmm.
use that magic or that special talent and that special ability, and that's the thing that makes them shine. I think that it's fun when you have a situation like this where there's no necessarily magic or special talent or gifting,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it is a gifting that she
Mm-hmm.
has this unique perspective on people, that she brings this light and life and fun.
Mm-hmm. Even in the midst of being forced to, fight to the death, she's used as a pawn because she is alluring and she's interesting, and people look at her as this flirty, fun, romantic figure who is bringing this life to the games. And Snow sees that, and in a sense, he does fall in love with that. I guess the thing is, she truly is the songbird. She's also the snake. They're kind of both in this sense, both her and Snow. They're both trying to manipulate the situation so that they both find glory almost. But, they both kind of find this love in each other, but it's fractured by their situation. It's been a while since I've read this book. I need to reread it. I really enjoyed it. There's a whole lot more depth with, just the nature of making kids, especially, you wouldn't think that Snow is struggling and stuff, but, in his mind, he is struggling and he's just as much a player in these games. Having, kids against kids. You have people who, in other situations, they would probably find love or be better people, but in essence, it's who you choose to be, with Snow choosing his ambition and hate rather than Lucy choosing love and ultimately like freedom. Katniss is kind of the exact opposite in some senses. She doesn't have a stage presence. She's very awkward with people, with making herself likable, and in a lot of cases, she doesn't super care to be likable.
Mhm.
She just wants to protect her sister. She wants to be the mother that her mother couldn't be because of all what she was going through. And she never really wanted to be part of the politics and the fighting and hatred and revolution, but she was made into a symbol, not because of her ruthlessness in battle, but because, and she was quite prolific with the bow. She was a fearsome fighter. She wasn't, or at least like with archery, she wasn't really like this very soft, like showy person like Lucy was. She was a lot more quiet and battle ready, I guess. But what won the hearts of the capital and of a lot of readers, I think, is her overwhelming love for her sister.
Mhm.
And PETA, Malark, says, I don't know if I could find it real quick. PETA says before they go into the whole Hunger Games situation, he says that he wants to show the capital that they don't own me, that I'm much more than just a piece in their games. Which Katniss originally is like, well, I just want to survive. Who cares about what we have to do? But ultimately, when she finds Rue, one of the kids in the game, and decides to try and protect her despite what it costs in terms of her own personal safety, it kind of awakens this need to protect and defend the innocent, which, the games are coming after. Kind of an overview why I like those characters, I think, specifically. I feel like they show different perspectives of strength and femininity. Is even if you are, maybe physically strong, most dystopian books, you have to have some sort of battle prowess or some edge to defend yourself. What the driving force of these people is the choice to put others before yourself and to value the innocence and gentleness in yourself and others.
Here's the next thought that I was having as
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of talking about. We've had a discussion, your dad and I, about what the attributes of a hero are.
Mhm.
And in talking about the things that you love about these female heroes, what is it? Is there actually something definable that makes a female strong character versus a male strong character? And this is one that is probably able to be argued about by lots of people. And you all may have your own ideas on that. If you do, feel free to comment. But I would love to just kind of think through and process that a bit.
Mhm.
Is coming from the Christian worldview, obviously we believe that men and women, they're equal, but they're
Mhm.
different. That they are uniquely created by God as different. And yet, so much of the time, the things that we do, the actions that we take, can be the same. It's the
Mhm.
same things that we value in men and
Mhm.
women. That loyalty, that strong moral compass. I mean, to me, that's one of the things that Katniss really sets her aside, is that
Mhm.
she had this clear cut sense of there's right and there's wrong, and I'm going to do what's right.
Mhm.
I will survive, but I'm also going to do what's right.
Yeah. I also something I feel like that sets her apart strangely is just the very humanness of going, like, especially at first and throughout most of the book, she doesn't go, I want to save the world. She goes, I want to save my sister. And I want to save PETA. I'm going to save the people who I can who are right in front of me. I feel like that's something that most people kind of look at as strange, but I feel like there's something we can't save everybody. The biggest thing about being strong is knowing where your weaknesses are and knowing, kind of understanding that you take the next right step and you do all in your power to do the next right thing, to
Mhm.
quote Anna from Frozen.
I love that movie. That's Frozen 2,
Yeah.
by the way. And that is, I honestly think, probably my favorite Disney princess moment
Mm-hmm. Was Anna. Um,
was when she's faced with, she thinks that she's lost her sister.
and Olaf.
Like,
Oh.
just everything has crumbled around her, and
Mm-hmm.
she's faced with, like, just something so unbelievably overwhelming that it's like, how can I actually go on? And the answer that she has is just do the next right thing. And I
Yeah.
feel like that is one of, like, for a kids movie, I think
Mm-hmm.
that is just so profound.
Mm-hmm. That's something
So
that also sticks out to me about. We really enjoyed this movie. It's very underrated, even though it like just came out. Not enough people are watching it, so go watch it. It's War of the Rohirrim.
mm,
That it really honored the spirit of Tolkien and his writing.
hmm
And despite, it's not canonical, it doesn't follow anything he's written, it feels like it could have been. And most people kind of look at it and go, "Oh, it's a girl power fantasy using Lord of the Rings, having like a daughter of a well-known historical figure from the books."
hmm
But it really surprised me and you,
yeah.
surprised us both of how incredibly well done it was. And
hmm
she definitely was powerful, but not in the ways that you'd expect. She's not just like this cardboard cutout that you kind of look at and go, "Oh yeah, that's just girl power, feminist, like over the top type," instead
hmm
of being like an actual person, which sometimes I think we try so hard to make someone super strong that we don't make them a person, we make them a caricature, which
I think
happens a
that's
lot
the
with
thing,
women.
is a lot of times you see when they make a female character that is really strong, really good at fighting, they sometimes make her overpowered. And I felt like
Mhm.
this one, she was smart. She
Mm-hmm.
caught things that other people didn't necessarily catch, but she
She was
wasn't the
quick.
only smart character.
Yeah,
She had other intelligent characters that were there backing her up.
especially her brothers and her dad. Something we sacrifice a lot in books and movies is in order to make the female character empowered or strong, we make the male characters extremely dumb, which I think really hurts our story and our characters because
Well, they did make her dad rather dumb in choosing to reject her and her cousin, right? It was her cousin, their counsel too.
mm,
And a lot of people didn't like that. That you have because he was the big name character,
yeah.
Helm Hammerhand. He was the larger than life person. And yet,
Mhm.
by kind of putting Hera as being the one that saw the danger, and that if he'd listened to her, then things would have been totally different. It was his arrogance and his pride
Mhm.
in not being willing to listen that caused his own downfall and the
I
death of
feel
his sons. And
spoilers.
yeah, sorry. But it's been out for a while now, so I think the people that really, really wanted to see it probably have seen it. I'm
Yeah.
hoping so anyway. And maybe if any of you half a dozen people that watch this haven't seen it yet, you might be intrigued enough to
Oh,
actually go and watch it.
please watch it. It was excellent. And I feel like the flaws with the dad, I feel like they were realistic for he was
Hmm.
very overpowered. Like even in terms of like male strength, he was punching people and knocking them down, which is an interesting thing because there are definitely, you have the female version where they're super overpowered and strong, but we have a whole lot of very overpowered male characters, which I think in certain contexts are fine because it's fantasy, or either fantasy or superhero, where your characters are way stronger than they should be. He wasn't just a one note character, I feel like. He had a whole lot of depth and a character growth that involved his daughter, and they bounced off of each other really well.
Hmm.
And their relationship was really wholesome to me, even though there was a lot of like he wasn't listening to her, but that wasn't because he's just going, oh, you're a woman and we don't want to listen to you for like arbitrary reasons. It was because he really valued her and his only daughter, and they didn't have the mother around, so
He wanted to protect her,
yeah.
and she just wanted freedom,
Hmm.
really.
And she valued him too.
Hmm.
And you have so many like young female characters, especially who go, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm just gonna break out and do what I think is best." But she really listened and valued him, even when she knew that what he was saying was against what she would have wanted or thought was best. And she didn't break out into or do her own thing until she went, "Oh, I know that I need to do this or we're all gonna die.
I think one of her defining things, though, actually is something that a lot of female characters have in common is just the determination not to give up.
Hmm.
And it's just this weight of knowing there are people counting on this continuing forward, whatever this may be, and going that it's too big, it's too important to just stop trying.
Hmm.
Yeah, I may not be able to make a difference. I probably can't make a difference. I wasn't, in a lot of cases, I wasn't the one that was supposed to be making a difference.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that you see a lot of times with female characters specifically is they get put into a position where it's like they aren't even the one that it was supposed to all be
Hmm.
resting on. They weren't supposed to be the one that had to step up. There was someone else that was supposed to be doing that was unable to, or that gave
Mm-hmm.
up, and they just go, you know what? No, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going. It's
Mm-hmm.
too big to just not try.
Yeah. I feel like there's something
The
almost
determination.
unique about that. You can see it a lot in like younger male characters, but in just women characters in general, I feel like we tend like just as women we have kind of a really powerful presence to encourage people to be better and to be greater than they are supposed to be, than their human nature would you'd think would allow. You hear like all the things where it's like in Greek mythology, it's like there's a woman at the, or even just in any like history, mythology situation, women tend to be the driving force of a lot of wars. They may not be fighting them, especially in like historical sense, unless you're like Joan of Arc, but even Joan of Arc, she's kind of raised up into this magical being, but she as a person was encouraging people to fight for justice. And I feel like that's something that sets women apart, is we kind of have that power to push people to be better. And
There's
yeah.
an inspirational presence that women uniquely have. We have the ability to inspire, we have the ability to encourage in a way that a lot of times men don't do as well.
We also see like the bigger picture of what things could be. And we see like all the different sides too, just with
It's
that
a
heightened
determination
empathy.
and an inability to stop hoping
Mm-hmm.
that I think that women a lot of times get accused of seeing the world through
Rose
rose
colored
colored glasses.
glasses.
That is kind of a uniquely female thing.
So it's also you're seeing, yeah, I speak as myself as a very highly empathetic person, but women in general we tend to have that heightened emotional understanding and intelligence. And we have a wisdom but also like a foresight, which can also lead to like a lot of anxiety. But in general, that being able to see all the sides and how bad things could be, we also have the strength to see how good things could be, to imagine a better future, and
Mhm.
to gather and encourage people towards that. And that all kind of starts with us just taking a step, ourselves, and leading other people when all hope seems lost.
I think that women are uniquely gifted to lead from behind.
Mhm. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all, honestly. I guess
Mm.
just as an introvert and someone, whom I, as in my work, I'm a manager, so I'm in a leadership position, but I'm more so organizing, the instructions and leading from behind, which there's a strength in that.
Mhm.
And, I think that's something that's really damaging about some of our thought processes in modern day, is going, oh, you're not enough if you're only a stay at home mom. It's like, what? Moms are great. Moms are incredible. And saying someone is just this or just that, or putting someone down because it's not enough, that you need to be greater than men. It's like, no. It's like, we're not trying to be greater. We have, everything has value.
Mhm.
And I think that if we're not careful, we can get into looking at, someone who's doing something and you go, oh, you're maybe a career woman, but you're not doing enough. Or you're a stay at home mom, you're not doing enough. Like,
Yeah. I think it's one of the drawbacks of living in a fallen world that you always kind of have the power struggle between the sexes that kind of started in the Garden of Eden, right?
oh, yeah.
You've got the whole it was Eve that was the one that listened to the serpent, that took the apple, that ate it, that then gave it to
Hmm.
Adam. Adam had that choice, but Eve was the first one.
He was also not leading by
No.
example. He A lot of
That's the
people think
thing.
that he was right next to her, given how it was described, that he was standing with her listening to the serpent, and he was silent, and he took
Hmm.
the apple. And, he was the first one in the garden. He had the responsibility to lead and set a precedent for who they would be as a team, but they didn't.
Ever since then, you've had kind of the whole thing of the man and the woman and who is leading and
Mm-hmm.
who is, directing. And the it seems like so many times, in order for men to lead, they feel like they need to put women down.
Mm.
And throughout history, for a long time there was a very male dominated culture. And something that was brought up in our Bible study
Mm-hmm.
this last week, we were talking about the fact that Mary Magdalene
Mm-hmm.
was the first one to see Jesus after he came back, after he
Mm-hmm.
was resurrected. And just the fact that when you have the whole planning, right? You've got God and Jesus who are, going, okay, who's going to be the one that's going to be the first one to bear witness to the fact of this pivotal moment in history has happened?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, let's take Mary. Let's take the one that was overrun by demons,
Mm-hmm.
who was rescued, who's been following me, and let's make her be the one.
Mm-hmm.
Let's ignore the fact that at that time in history, a woman, could not even give testimony in court.
Mm-hmm.
Her word would mean nothing from a legal
Mm-hmm.
standpoint. Let's give it to her. And it's one of those that just you see over and over how much Jesus loved women and uplifted them in a culture and in a time where women were not educated. They weren't allowed to learn the Torah. They weren't allowed to learn the scriptures. And yet Jesus came along and he brought women along and
Mm-hmm.
discipled them. They were the ones who actually funded his ministry. And the very first one to witness his resurrection, was a woman. You see how.
It's kind of fitting, considering like the one to see him
Mhm,
first was, Mary, his mother, and then the one to see him come back again
mhm.
was Mary Magdalene.
And
It's
then
even funnier because I'm pretty sure the name Mary means troublemaker, or it was either like tragedy or, let me find it real quick because it was just too funny not to mention. Means both beloved, bitter, drop of the sea, and wished for child, according to bare minimum Google search.
okay.
So bitter, which I think is just a funny,
Mhm.
funny name.
But the thing is, though, is that as much as you see women being lifted up and being loved in the Bible, and you see men a lot of times putting women down, now you see kind of this reverse that's happened with the rise of feminism. And you see kind of this bitterness where it's not just, there's so
It's
much bitterness and brokenness in the
yeah.
world where it's like, in order to raise one up, we feel like we have to put the other gender down. And it's like, you know what? Men are loved and created in the image of God just the same as women
Mm-hmm.
are. There's nothing wrong with having both genders
Mm-hmm.
lifted up, embracing the beauty of and the uniqueness of each gender,
Yeah.
of saying that, masculinity is such a beautiful thing too, the same as femininity is, and that
Mm-hmm.
neither one has to put the other down.
Yeah.
We can see and encourage and love those unique attributes of both genders.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, maybe we need to do something about the masculine
Could
characters
be fun.
too, and see what
I
makes them unique. I think
I tend to really, you know, despite I love female characters and I tend to very much resonate with them, I also very much resonate with male characters too. I feel like there's a lot of personality traits that I tend to relate to just in certain heroes. Like if I would be any Marvel superhero, it wouldn't be Black Widow. I love Black Widow, but it wouldn't be Black Widow. It would be Spider Man. And that's kind of the interesting thing with saying what makes a strong male character, what makes a strong female character. It's a lot of the same things, but it really just kind of feel like there's kind of that strength in the unique ways that we love and lift each other up and not tearing each other down.
it's interesting because we said or asked the question earlier, is there something actually tangible that makes a woman, you know, a woman? And it's, aside from the fact that, yeah, you've got the actual physical or
Physicalness.
genetic, part of it, there is something just uniquely feminine, but it does seem indefinable in ways.
Yeah.
And it's kind of one of those, you see a lot of people that get very hung up on those characteristics of what makes a woman. It's like you can have you can be soft, you can be, we say what those feminine attributes are, but they're not necessarily always uniquely feminine. You can have
Yeah.
a man that has feminine characteristics that does
He's
it in his
still,
own unique masculine way.
yeah.
It's like, and we try to say, things like colors or things like
Mm,
interest or, you know,
it's hard because a lot of that I feel is really perpetuated by advertisements.
yeah, there's
The whole pink and
stereotyped
blue.
genders that are very much, they're stereotypes and they don't have anything to do with the makeup of feminine or masculine.
I think
In
the
my
biggest
opinion.
difference, just in I guess, a personality way, is the way our brains work. Especially just,
Mm.
you get the whole spaghetti brain or the compartmentalized brain. And though that's not literally accurate to how our brains are, I feel like it really, in my experience, that's definitely true. Just the ways that we're able to think, I feel they tend to complement each other, but also tend to grate on each other, especially coming from someone who has brothers and guy friends. They're wonderful. It's weird. Boys are weird.
I think it really does just boil down to a man and a woman can do the exact same thing, and yet one will do it in a feminine way and one will do it in a masculine way. And we know that there's a difference, but we don't know how to define it. And yet we know that it's uniquely feminine and uniquely masculine
Hmm.
in the way that it's done. And it's just one of those that it's like, it's there.
It's there, but it's psychological. It's sort of like, I think that's the biggest reason it's hard to define because, it's like you have all the jokes where it's
Yeah.
like a woman goes at the thing and it's like, oh,
Well, it's the same thing as, people have been trying to define love for
yeah.
forever. It's like, how
What
do
is
you
love?
define such a huge concept of love? We can say different attributes of love, different
Baby, don't
things that,
hurt me. I'm
okay.
sorry.
I try not to. Oh, dear. But the feminine is a part of us. It's in everything that we do, everything that we say. And it's hard to define, and yet we'll always try to define it, won't we? But that's one of the things that I love about art.
And poetry. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking poetry. That's the biggest reason I write poetry, is because I'm always trying to define the undefinable, which I feel, this is galaxy brain shower thoughts type deal, but I feel like there's a really thin difference between poetry and science, or just art and science. Art, you are constantly trying to define the undefinable. Science, you're constantly trying to define the undefinable. And that's what I think, that's why I think that having a Christian worldview on top of science and art adds to it.
Science is defining the undefinable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I thought science was more about defining the tangible, whereas art was more about defining the intangible.
Sure,
The
but
emotion,
I guess it depends on what you're studying, because, you know, I mean, in the literal sense, you probably should not be touching sharks if you can help it. But no, there's also, there's space things. We can't define
But science
things in
isn't
space.
science unless it's actually provable.
It's true, but in
science
another
is
side
literally
of that,
just observing the observable.
yeah, but you also
Otherwise,
can't.
it's philosophy.
Yeah, but you also can't. You can't prove everything. We can look at a molecule and we can think we know one thing, but then the definition changes. We can have this whole classification of every single species,
which is why the science is settled is the most ludicrous statement ever. Science is observations, and observations are continually evolving, and you never necessarily have settled science.
Yeah, and I don't think it ever should. You're constantly defining things that get to the point where it's like it's not tangible. Even the tangible things, are they really tangible? We can't completely understand them. And I think that's why, having that Christian worldview is, in essence, I feel like what bonds the two, art and science, and trying to define the undefinable, is almost worship, I guess. Is you are looking towards a higher being that you cannot define. And you can understand little things. And God is tangible, but he's also intangible. So much of this earth, it's tangible in a sense, but there is so much that we can't define, but we still try to. And we try to understand. We keep praying because we seek a relationship.
Center of humanity, isn't it?
It's like
trying to define the intangible, the undefinable.
And like with a relationship, me and you, we're never going to completely understand each other, but we try. And that's the fun of a relationship. And that's the fun, I think, of having a relationship with God, which is what worship is. And I feel like art and science are, in a sense, worship. Is you're trying to define something that is undefinable. You're constantly searching out answers, even though you'll never understand. But you have peace with that, because every day you learn something new and your perspective changes. And while God doesn't change, he's so expansive that there's just so much to comprehend. And, I feel like even us as humans, though we change, I feel like there is something intrinsic about us, which, I think goes back to having a soul.
We're eternal beings. I think that we could just keep going forever.
But yeah, so in essence, art, science, how does that relate to femininity? You tell us in the comments.
Oh, thank you for joining us for this very rambling episode. Hopefully you have enjoyed and been able to follow along somewhat. We are far too alike in some ways. We tend to ramble and jump about quite a bit. But
is it the ADHD? Is it the being women? Is it maybe we're just a different magical thing? I don't know. Something weirder.
All right. So, did we define what makes a strong female character? I don't think we got there completely, but I think maybe we scratched at the surface, and I think that was about all that we could hope to do with that topic. It's a big topic.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you for joining me. Hopefully, we'll have you back on here
Hopefully.
again.
Hopefully I don't get kicked out for talking too long.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.